Okay, are we live? Are we live? We're gonna turn on. I forgot to turn on my beginning music. Do some. I don't know. I don't know what kind of music this is. Anyways, welcome everybody to Alien Soup Podcast. This isn't the official podcast. This is just a weekly update to the podcast because we didn't have. Let's turn this down a little bit. We didn't have time to do the regular scheduled podcast last week because we were camping. But we still had some information we wanted to put out, or I had some information I wanted to put out. So this is that episode. Just kind of, I guess, a placeholder. Since week 4 didn't come out, we're going to do week 5. So welcome to the podcast. In this episode, we're going to be talking about UFOs, weekly UFO updates like we usually do. Tons of UFO stuff in the news I want to talk about. I think I got a little bit more organized this time. And then I want to start going through this book. Let's see. I think I could turn this music off now. A minute intro music. That's good. I didn't like that song anyways. Sorry. Here we go. This book, it's called A Kid by the Side of the Road by Wano Savin. We're going to talk about QAnon. QAnon, the Q-spiracy, and where they have gone. Where are they? Let's see if I can get my friend Scott in here. Just started the podcast. Maybe we can get him some more info on him or from him. He follows the QAnon a little bit closer than I do. But I guess let's just get started. Let's get right into it. Maybe wait another minute or two. We can get a viewer in here or not. Some viewers. UFO in the news. It seems like almost every week new UFO information is coming out in the news. Not in the mainstream media, of course. They, for whatever reason, hardly touch it other than the 60 Minutes, which I guess that is the biggest thing to come out in a while, was the interview with the former, he was some kind of high-level guy at the Pentagon that had to deal with these. Let's see. So we're going to look into that story and talk about a little bit of the history of it. Oh, there's a, let's see. Okay. I guess let's just get started. See if anybody's gonna join. Maybe not. All right, this is gonna be a good one, anyways. It's just gonna be me and whoever watches this after the fact. Leave a comment, like, and subscribe. We'll be doing this every week, coming out with new information, and the longer we go, the weirder it's going to get. Our episodes so far have been pretty clean cut. Haven't gotten too much of the weird stuff, but I think we're going to start getting into the weird stuff next week as we get into the Dulce base and the conspiracies that surround what's going on down there in New Mexico. Let's bring up our first part of the subject. So let's look into let's watch this clip from Fox News. This is Tucker Carlson's show, and basically the hold on, let's see. The title is Tucker Says It's Time for Answers. So we're gonna blow this up, move it to here. All right, and there I am. All right, so Tucker says it's time for answers. Let's hear what he has got to say. Fox with Friends.
So for a couple of years now, we've done regular segments on UFOs because there is a lot of evidence that maybe there's something to this.
Ooh, I'll look that up right now, Scott.
In the space of the last month or two, we've been drowned with evidence. By the way, on Sunday we learned, no big deal, that UFOs have been flying into restricted airspace off the coast of Virginia every day for years. We learned this Sunday night on 60 Minutes when former Navy commander David Fravor
Every
said
day
he
for
witnessed
years.
flying over the Pacific Ocean in November of 2004.
And we saw this little white tic-tac looking object, and it's just kind of moving above the whitewater area.
As Dietrich circled above, Fravor went in for a closer look.
So you're sort of spiraling down?
Yep. The tic-tac still pointing north-south. It goes and just turns abruptly and starts mirroring me. So as I'm coming down, it starts coming up.
So it's mimicking your moves.
Yeah, it was aware we were there.
He said it was about the size of his F-18, with no markings, no wings, no exhaust plumes.
I'll see how close I can get. So I go like this, and it's climbing still. And when it gets right in front of me, it just disappears.
So we talked to David Fravor last night, and he told us something that was fascinating that we didn't know. So this happens. He sees a UFO very clearly while flying a military jet in 2004, but the military doesn't save the tape of the incident or any of the data on the ship. Why wouldn't you? It's clearly a security risk, but you ignore it? How many other UFOs have been ignored by the U.S. military? How many others have been hidden? Leslie Kean is one of the few people who might know the answer to that question. She's the author of UFOs, Generals, Pilots, and Government Officials.
Gonna have to get her book.
She joins us tonight. Leslie, thanks so much for coming on.
Hi, Tucker. It's great to be with you
This is baffling
tonight.
on a... Oh, well, I'm so glad that you're here. It's baffling on a bunch of different levels, but the most basic is this has happened a lot, not just a few times, but according to 60 Minutes on Sunday, every day for years. What has the military's response to this been?
It is amazing, and I didn't even know till last night that some of the data had been confiscated, or at least we don't know where it is. I mean, the military's response so far has been a lot better than it used to be, Tucker. I've been covering this story for 20 years, and you know that we're in a real sea change right now, where the military is acknowledging that these things are real. Of course, we have a ways to go, but we have a report that's coming up, and I think we're really moving forward in a really good way right now.
Any idea, this is kind of parenthetical, but I've been thinking about it all day, any idea why after 70 years of lying about it and covering this up, the military is dribbling out details like this? Is there some purpose? Is this part of a PR strategy of some kind, do you think?
I don't look at it that way. I don't think it's any kind of orchestrated, strategic move. I just think a number of circumstances happened to precipitate this, and the most important one being that Luis Elizondo resigned from his job at the Department of Defense and revealed the fact that he had been heading up a program there for 10 years. This program that was started off in 2007, with the help of Harry Reid, and nobody knew that there was a department within the Department of Defense, or a program within the Department of Defense studying UFOs until that moment. And that was a huge revelation. There were 3 videos that were released from the program, and it was just, that's been a big change. And the military's been forced to acknowledge things that they wouldn't have had to admit before that.
Leaking got them moving. Lou Elizondo's on tomorrow night, by the way. I agree. I think he's a heroic figure in the story.
Ooh, that means he's already been on.
We're
going to have to look at that.
You've covered it more than anybody. Why generations of military officials felt the need to cover this up?
It's such a big and complex question, Tucker. I mean, the cover-up, if you want to call it a cover-up, it began in the 40s, 50s, 60s during the Cold War. So there was a lot of concern because we were dealing with Russians. They didn't want to have things get mixed up with all the issues of Russian aircraft and all the issues within the Cold War. I think there's been a concern about what to tell people when you can't explain something. There's something, operating with impunity that shows very advanced technology. What do you tell people about that when you can't stop it, when you can't explain it? And I think there's also just there's a stigma, Tucker, that you're well aware of. You've been one of the people battling this stigma, where, it's just been considered for decades and decades to be something ridiculous. And people don't want to talk about something that's going to make them look ridiculous, and it might even damage their careers. So there's so many factors that have kept this under wraps. And we're really at an important time right now. I'm so happy to see it changing after all these years.
I am too. And it's important to tell the truth no matter what people think of it, as you will. Okay. All right. Let's go back. All right. So pretty incredible stuff that this is all just coming out. Just kind of like an explosion. I mean, if you really think about it, just for years and years and years that they've just denied and denied and denied. And now they're changing their minds and just putting information out there. there's still a lot of denial from people that want to believe it's not aliens. I mean, I think that first of all, aliens kind of go hand in hand, and we're gonna watch something here in a little bit that I think kind of sheds some light on that, but we'll get to it. Let's see. Scott says the swarming of the Navy U.S. vessels. Yeah, I found something on that. I'm trying to see if they have a better video. Let's see. The only video that I could find is this one.
Well, no.
Let's get. Oh, way too much going on. Way too much going on.
This could be the biggest
Stop.
ever.
Oh my God, I can't stop it. Sorry. Too many ads. Too much going on. Okay. There's the Navy footage swarming. Let's see. I haven't seen this one yet. Let's get through this ad. And then Scott also says a deep state alien invasion narrative. That's a big one that I've heard in a lot of different spaces about them possibly faking an alien invasion, using holograms to put UFOs into the air to make it look like we're being invaded. Meanwhile, they're just trying to use it as a scare tactic. Do UFOs exist? I think that beyond a 100% chance that they do. They've been seen for a long time, much longer than we've had even close to any kind of hologram technology. I think that, the evidence kind of shows that we got a lot of technology from downed versions of these craft. So I don't know. I think it's a potential, because I definitely think that the government's definitely capable of doing stuff like that. Yeah, I see what you're saying. It is pretty. Let's put it up on the thing. It's basically just radar footage of. It's basically just some radar footage. Do I want the sound on? Should turn the sound on.
This footage of a radar seen by sailors aboard the USS Omaha back in 2019 shows as many as 14 UFOs swarming the ship off the coast of San Diego. At least one of the objects was moving upwards of 160 miles per hour.
That one's pretty much perfectly 000 relative, right?
Yeah. 263 at 3 miles, 55 knots speed.
Wow.
Investigative filmmaker Jeremy Corbell
Here's
says
some.
the clip verifies a prior video he released.
We've already seen this before in different episodes.
Footage showing a mysterious object flying over the ship before disappearing into the Pacific Ocean. And as we get a look at more sightings, officials warn that these objects appear to be far more advanced than our aircrafts. Harry,
Yes. Okay. We agree. We agree with you. So this stuff is just coming out more and more. I don't know. It also could be possible that they are giving that whole narrative of the government possibly faking an attack, because if there were to be an attack, maybe they want some of those people to not totally panic. They want there to be a lot of answers in place so people can fill the blanks in their space with some viable answers that possibly don't lead to the total deconstruction of our society. You say 138 kilometers. My car goes faster. I don't know why they mention it. Well, I think it's. Well, they were looking at it in the water, right? So I think that because they're talking about knots, and that's the speed in water. So I mean that would be pretty fast. Let's see. There's a Tucker Carlson. Let's see. That was on April 9th. Is this old or something? March 23rd. Let's see. So this Luis Elizondo. Let's check out this one real quick. March 23rd. That was March. That was a while ago. Hold on. I want to find something recent with Elizondo in it. Doesn't look like much. Yeah, there's some stuff about what the Americans should expect from UFO report, but we're going to talk about that when we do this podcast, episode 4 of the podcast next week. Let's see. So, okay, let's keep going with UFOs in the media. So, okay, we're going to. We are going to check out the Hill's take on it. So we kind of saw in that one that, maybe some people think that this is, what did I do on this? Jeez, I'm just like clicking all these buttons. I don't even know what's going on. I did fix my sound though. If my sound sounds better, it's because I did stuff. Okay, hold on. So I want to go to, I'm going to skip around in this one because this is kind of a longer, this is almost a 10-minute long clip. So I think we're going to start at 2 minutes on this one. This gives a bit of the history, and a little bit of insight, into what what led up to the release of these files. And I'm proud to say that Senator Harry Reid, a native Nevadan, I didn't agree with a lot of his politics, he's the one that has been interested in UFOs. I guess he saw one when he was a kid, and he shared this interest with some other people. Anyways, I'll let them tell the story. This goes on for about 2.5 minutes, and then we'll pause and then go to the conclusion of it, which is about 45 seconds. So let's see. Start right here. Turn my sound on. And okay.
Absolutely not impossible. This is one of the greatest mysteries of our civilization. First, I'll state that it is absolutely.
Oh gosh, and then it gives us a damn ad. I'm not going to listen to that. It tricked us. I tried to skip forward so we didn't have to watch that, and then it still made us watch ads. I should get YouTube Premium so we don't have to watch ads. But that's $15 a month.
Elaborate psyop for more military funding. But
right.
Evidence surrounding
back up a little
could be one of the greatest mysteries of our civilization. First, I'll state that it is absolutely not impossible this is an all elaborate psyop for more military funding, but that I believe it's extraordinarily unlikely. Gideon Lewis Krause of The New Yorker, he recently wrote this story titled How the Pentagon Started Taking UFOs Seriously. Now, we had him on the show, and I consider it to be the definitive first draft of history as to how exactly those within the five-sided building came to reckon with what was being seen as by airmen of all time during the flight. Now, the history of Project Blue Book and early Pentagon attempts to cover up UFOs are well known. And if you don't know, I encourage you to go read about it. But the modern history of disclosure is very important to understand. It begins in 2007, when then Senator Harry Reid of Nevada had a discussion with Robert Bigelow of Skinwalker Ranch. Now, Reid, who has long been fascinated by UFOs and critically had just become the Senate Majority Leader, called up Senator Ted Stevens. Stevens, who was a senator from Alaska, shared a fascination of UFOs with Reid because he was a pilot in the Second World War and he had reported a UFO encounter. It stayed with him for the rest of his life. Now, Stevens and Reid corralled Hawaii Senator Daniel Inouye. Together, they placed a secret $22 million appropriation in a 2008 supplemental appropriations bill to investigate the phenomenon. The Pentagon pushed back hard. They didn't want any of this. Reid basically pulled rank and said, I'm the most powerful person in the Senate, so you're just going to do it. So from that point forward, the Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Applications Program, or ATIP, was born, which began studying Robert.
Is this, can you see this video? Is it not playing this video? What's going on? Have a bit of a technical difficulty. Scott, can you see this video on the screen? No. Oh my gosh. Why did it do this? There it goes. All right. Let's rewind. Was that showing, or was that just hearing the sound? I don't think that was showing. Let's just go back. Let's go back. It's not a possible psyop. We only watched 45 seconds.
This is an all elaborate psyop for more military funding.
There it goes.
But that I believe it's extraordinarily unlikely. Gideon Lewis Krause of The New Yorker, he recently wrote this story titled How the Pentagon Started Taking UFOs Seriously. Now, we had him on the show, and I consider it to be the definitive first draft of history as to how exactly those within the five-sided building came to reckon with what was being seen as by airmen of all time during the flight. Now, the history of Project Blue Book and early Pentagon attempts to cover up UFOs are well known. And if you don't know, I encourage you to go read about it. But the modern history of disclosure is very important to understand. It begins in 2007, when then Senator Harry Reid of Nevada had a discussion with Robert Bigelow of Skinwalker Ranch. Now, Reid, who has long been fascinated by UFOs and critically had just become the Senate Majority Leader, called up Senator Ted Stevens. Stevens, who was a senator from Alaska, shared a fascination of UFOs with Reid because he was a pilot in the Second World War and he had reported a UFO encounter. It stayed with him for the rest of his life. Now, Stevens and Reid corralled Hawaii Senator Daniel Inouye. Together, they placed a secret $22 million appropriation in a 2008 supplemental appropriations bill to investigate the phenomenon. The Pentagon pushed back hard. They didn't want any of this. Reid basically pulled rank and said, I'm the most powerful person in the Senate, so you're just going to do it. So from that point forward, the Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Applications Program, or ATIP, was born, which began studying Robert Bigelow's Skinwalker Ranch and all sorts of crazy stuff, like goblins and dog-like creatures. But critically, it also hired Lou Elizondo, who you heard from earlier, in 2010. Now, Elizondo had no opinion on UFOs at the time. He was later promoted to the head of the program in 2010, which turned the program exclusively into the study of the national security implications of UAP, or unidentified aerial phenomena, encounters. It was there that Elizondo became familiar with the encounter he describes in the 60 Minutes clip, and many more, where he came to believe that UFOs are real, but was refused access to the Secretary of Defense repeatedly to brief him on the project and what he found in the Pentagon's files. From there, he was later introduced to Leslie Keane, a journalist who's been investigating UFOs for many years, by former defense official Christopher Mellon. Now, Elizondo briefed Keane on the program. He then resigned and then led to the now famous 2017 New York Times story, which sparked the UFO renaissance of today. Now, I took you through this torturous history for a reason, so you can understand the Pentagon had absolutely zero interest in letting any of this come out. They pushed back against Harry Reid. They tried to bury Lou Elizondo.
Okay, so we'll stop it there and jump ahead. So now we kind of see, I guess, a little bit more of the history of how this was to start to come out. So what's the conclusion? Move it about here.
Factors, but it's almost certainly not because of a willful Pentagon effort to put more information out there. The modern history of UFOs, instead, is a much more hopeful story in which the truth was dragged out, and now that it's out there, they just simply don't know how to control the narrative anymore. As Lewis Krauss himself told us here on Rising, if the Pentagon wanted to raise money, there are a whole lot of easier ways in order to do so. Iraq, Afghanistan, terrorism, Russia, China. There's a lot of easier ways to get billions of dollars more in appropriations. Instead, this is a case of people who for a long time tried to deny reality, were then forced to reckon with it, and are now coming clean with us out of necessity. In other words, they're not manipulating us. We are manipulating them. And I did this column because, and I understand it, people are like, why now? Like, why now? Well, if you go and you see the modern history of what happened here, it was basically, this all only happened because Harry Reid was the most powerful person in the Senate, and he was just really interested in UFOs. And he's like, no, you guys are going to do it. And they pushed back so hard against him. You can read in some of the reporting. He's like, no, you're going to do it. And then he kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And once they had the information, then the SecDef, Mattis, he didn't want to hear it. Him and his staff, they're like, no, no. So they went to a journalist, and the moment the New York Times comes out, boom, now you have to talk about it. So it's critical that they're not the ones who are putting this out there. They're not the ones even necessarily who enjoy seeing video.
Okay. Very interesting. Very interesting. What do you think, Scott? Is it a CIA op? Is it a CIA psyop? They know exactly what they're doing? What could it be? I don't know. I think he's right, personally. I think that they've been trying to keep the lid on this as long as possible, and the certain people got into the right places and got it and got the ball rolling. That's what I think. What do you mean? I mean, I think this is extremely important. You don't think this is interesting? I think you're missing the details about how this happened. This basically shows that this isn't an effort by the Pentagon to create a psyop. They aren't deciding for themselves that now is a good time. So you do think for the general this is an acknowledgement, but do you think that do you think it's a leak perpetuated by the Pentagon or by the CIA or something like that? It just doesn't have that feel to it, because there would be a lot more. I mean, maybe it's coming, but there would be a lot more events tied around it. But he's right. I mean, if you listen to him, he says right there, like there's no real motivation for them to leak this at this point. The biggest thing, I mean, the only benefit I could see of them leaking it right now is that everybody is so distracted with everything else that's going on, and everyone's worrying about themselves and how they're going to survive, that no one's really paying attention to it that much. And on top of that, I think that it's also a generational thing. I don't think that I think that our generation kind of is like, yeah, duh, there's aliens, and we are ready to accept it. But I don't think the older generations are necessarily completely ready yet. Maybe some are. But I don't know. So maybe it's not as big. I mean, it is big. It's the biggest news of the century. But maybe they're not making as a big of a deal out of it because of everything else that's going on. I don't know. Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean. Scott says all truths will be revealed. This is a bigger than alphabet soup groups. Yes. than the CIA and the FBI. That's what I mean. This is they're not going to be able to control this. I think that if they wanted to perpetuate a fake war, the real deal, a real contact will be so much more astounding that it will dwarf any kind of attempt that they could try to pull to make it seem like we're under attack. However, I think that we should also be extremely cautious regardless of if they are trying to fake a attack, because what we do read in a lot of the literature is that there are a good amount of evil entities, both physical and living in alternate dimensions, that I guess want to feed off us in one way or another, feed off our energy or actually feed off of us. So with that being said, it would be smart by our military and our government to be cautious of aliens. Right. This is part of the truth reveal and the removal of the cabal. I agree. I think the cabal is the one that wants to perpetuate an alien invasion. It sounds like they want us to view the aliens as enemies. They perpetuate a false war, in which case they make it seem like we win, and the aliens leave us alone, or whatever the case may be. And they use their versions of UFOs, and basically kind of they control the contact at that point. They control the narrative of what our interaction is with UFOs from the point of contact after that. And I don't think that's where we want to be. We want transparency. We don't, if a group like the cabal takes over, I mean, they already do. I mean, if they completely, they already do to own everything. They already have taken over, basically. I don't know. It's a lot to think about. Because they're implicated in other truths like human trafficking. Yeah, they don't. I mean, that's why they wanted to keep. I think that's why they wanted to keep us away from this for so long, because they want us focused inward. They want us focused in on minor details for as long as possible, because I mean that's kind of like slavery of the mind. If you can keep people from looking outward towards the world around them and asking questions and wanting to explore and find out more about their world, then you can keep them confined in their own little world. Let's go on. I just want to watch this. Let's see what our president
videos get leaked.
Hold on.
But when they do, now.
Okay. Yeah, he was just saying right there basically how I guess we could go back to this for a sec. He's basically saying, like, for years and years they've debunked all these UFO sightings, which I mean I have heard a lot of them like aren't very credible, but there are ones that are credible. But now we kind of have to go back. I feel like we have to go back and look at everything and know and see if if we're correct or not. All right, we're gonna go. Let's watch this short little clip of our brave leader. Let's see. Oh yeah, if you're watching, Scott, don't forget to hit the like button so YouTube will share this. And let's watch this real quick.
President Obama says that there is footage and records of objects in the skies, these unidentified aerial phenomenon, and he says we don't know exactly what they are. What do you think that it is?
I would ask him again. Thank you. Come on, boss, let's go.
Wow.
Hey, NBC.
Big wow. Big garbage. I don't know what happened there. He said President Obama, and Biden immediately like laughs at that. So maybe he was like offended that he called former President Obama, but I think that they do that. Because then he was like, before he leaves, he was like, come on, boss. Like he's not the president or something. Which I don't know. I don't know what that was. We also know that, I mean, from watching, if you've ever seen like Bush or Obama or even Clinton talk about like asking, like, are there aliens or the UFOs? They always like, and they don't even lie. They don't even try to lie or even try to deceive anymore. They just say, we're not allowed to talk about it. They tell us we can't talk about it. So, I mean, that means there's something there. All right. Let's see what's up next. What's up next? Are we going to QAnon right now? Oh, yeah. So, okay. Before we go to QAnon, let's just watch. I didn't really. Let's just watch this clip. So, and I'll pause it and talk about it in between. So QAnon. So, the title of this is QAnon disappears. Can cable news let it go? And I like their metaphorical thumbnail that you can't see, but it says QAnon. All right, let's just watch the first part of this and just listen. If you're a QAnon fan, just listen. Listen to how they word it. Okay.
Fascinating. QAnon has all but disappeared, especially from mainstream social media platforms. That's according to researchers who spoke with Axios. The amount of QAnon content online took a massive nosedive after big tech platforms, that includes Google, Twitter, Facebook, made major moderation and policy moves.
The research, however, did not assess the volume of QAnon discussions in like private groups or messaging platforms.
Okay, let's just stop it there real quick. So basically what they're saying is that they've deplatformed everything that has to do with QAnon, and that QAnon is no more. But they're not, I mean, obviously, and you're going to see as they continue talking, they don't know anything about QAnon. I don't, follow QAnon that close and what they've done since the January 6th ordeal. But they're definitely not gone. I mean, somebody wrote this book. There's a lot going on, and we're gonna get into that in a little bit. But yeah. So, anyways, I just want to set this narrative. They don't zero idea of anything about QAnon.
Democratic strategist Michael Starr Hopkins, culture editor at the Feminist Edge, Emily Jashinsky, they join us now to discuss. Emily, I think there are two parts to the story here. One is that people need to realize deplatforming actually does work, which in my opinion makes it scarier. It used to be with a discussion of like, oh, well, if you remove them, then, they'll just all congregate somewhere else. No, like it's pretty clear here that a deplatforming does work, and that means it's actually even more powerful than some people insinuated from the beginning. But the second is that QAnon, it turns out, just like petered out completely, basically after like January 7th, and that all of the,
Okay, did it peter out completely? I mean, granted, I will definitely give them it definitely, especially after the election, it definitely lost its gusto. It doesn't. A lot of people, I think. Because a lot of the predictions didn't happen, it turned probably, if I could say there was millions of people that believed in QAnon, it probably turned off at least a quarter of them. I don't know, but I think it definitely turned people off to it. But did it peter out completely? definitely not. I mean, these people are meeting on the private, Q, or what is it, the 8chan and the 4chan networks on the black web. There's still everyone. I mean, yeah, you've deplatformed them, but they've gone to private, their own private websites, and there's plenty of other places where these people are able to share this information. Anyways, let's continue.
And ringing around terrorism and all that, none of it came to be true. Zero.
The volume of conversation that still occurs on like MSNBC about QAnon is genuinely astounding.
Yeah.
I don't think we know right now actually how big it ever was, and I don't think we know how big it is right now, because this could easily be something that is still pretty significant in certain private groups, whatever. Maybe they figured out different ways to do it. I'm not one of NBC News's conspiracy reporters, so I don't have exact details on that.
Misinformation specialist.
Yeah, what are you talking about?
Yeah, exactly.
And specialists.
Right, I'm sorry. Doctor specialist. But I will say that I think one of the problems with QAnon in terms of its recruitment strategy right now is that as this entire post-January 6th and post-Trump, I think, era has unfolded, it's just been neutered.
Okay, that right there just shows these people have zero idea what QAnon is, how it got started, and how it works. There is no recruiting strategy in QAnon. It's people sharing information. I mean, if there is a recruiting strategy, it's very, very discreet and under the table. I mean, there's no real leaders of QAnon, because even people in QAnon don't totally agree with what is going on. There's just a general consensus, I think, that something's not right, something's going on, and people want their country back. They want it fixed. They see it as a problem. How deep these conspiracies goes varies on the people that are, consider themselves, Q believers, or whatever you want to call, considers them part of QAnon. Scott says it's good that it's not a point of blame anymore. 100% agree. Totally. I mean, if you go back and you watch the videos of that day, I mean, there's plenty. I mean, that's the whole reason why they didn't impeach Trump. They didn't go through with it. Because there wasn't enough evidence that he incited violence, and then there was a bunch of confusion about who let the protesters in. There's plenty of video evidence where the police were letting them in, and they walked in peacefully. There was that one door where the police the interior security group had tried to block off certain areas, and that one group got crazy in that one area. But other than that, the crowds showed up because they allowed them in. I mean, it's a public building. People are allowed to walk in anyway. So it was like, but then they even allowed them in other entrances. So, I mean, to me, that screams weirdness. It screams that it was part of a plan regardless. There is some theory that the entire QAnon group, the whole thing is a psyop. I entertain that theory sometimes, because the QAnon started before QAnon. It was just Anon. It was just the anonymous group, and that's where you had people like Snowden and Julian Assange. And those people that were coming out, leaking this information, or they're giving it to Assange, and he was leaking this information. And what it did is it inspired other hackers and other people that they saw this as a way to get power over their oppressors. If they had, skills in computers, and thus began a kind of like, I guess, a hacker war. And that was the Anon movement. Then kind of out of nowhere, the QAnon stuff comes, and you have someone named Q on the 4chan networks leaking information, and basically starts I guess it gives structure and organization to a group that was purposefully not trying to have structure and organization. I think that part of QAnon was a psyop, possibly, in order to take the thunder away from the Anon group, in order to, I guess you could say, if they had a recruiting strategy, it would be to, reveal the truth. And they kind of took that, since they didn't want to have any kind of like organization, they took that created organization, and anyone who started to know about this group after the fact wanted something to follow and wanted to be a part of it, and they gave them that. Whereas like the Anon group was a bunch of hackers doing their thing kind of in secret. QAnon gave something, I guess, something for the general public. Let's see. Scott says, the way I see it, what they're doing, they feel they are discrediting Q and the Anons. Yes, I think so. I think that possibly, I don't know if I think they're partly trying to discredit them. It could also be a distraction. Like, let's just say that this whole thing is part of a plan. And they knew that some kind of shenanigans were going to be going on with the election. And instead of having millions of protesting patriots that wanted to correct the situation and would possibly take up arms or do any kind of violent thing, they wanted to kind of stifle these people and give them a storyline that makes them feel good. And that's kind of what's going on with some of this, like Real Raw News, one of my least favorite right-wing groups, because everything that they say, it's all feel-good pieces. It makes you feel like something is being done. They say like how Hillary Clinton's being arrested and Obama's being arrested, and all these people are facing justice, and they're not. They're still out there doing these things. So it's like, in a way, it's kind of hurting the movement. In a way, it's making people, it's curbing people's emotional outbursts to what could be going on, because they think that that something's being done about it and the problem's being solved, and they don't need to do anything because people are already doing stuff. And that's not true. And we need to be out there. We need to be, protesting, talking, getting information out, doing whatever we can do to get the truth out there. And I don't think that a lot of these people are really dedicated to the truth. I think they're dedicated to the cause of the movement, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're dedicated to the truth. And I think the truth will set us free. And the truth is what's going to bring us together. So that's the most important thing to me. And I wish that more people involved in the QAnon would be involved in getting the truth out there and dedicated to the truth. Let's see. The board has a lot of future proves the past stuff to it, which makes you think, how could they know so far out? Yeah. I mean, it talks a lot about that, but it also, like other QAnon people have said, that it's a lot of it is misinformation. A lot of it's put out there on purpose to, one, I think that it makes sense to put out misinformation because it makes you seem less credible, and therefore they're not going to be attacked. Like, if their enemy is the cabal can easily write them off being like, look how crazy they are. They said this. And then they pay slightly less attention to them. But it also gives them that avenue to get out those little gold nuggets of information to the people. And I think that it's one way. I mean, obviously, because you have MSNBC, and that's what this thing that we're watching here on the Hill is basically, they're saying like, QAnon is gone. It's completely gone. Why is MSNBC beating this to death? Because they know it's not gone. That's why. Because they know it's still there and they want to kill it. So I mean, they look at QAnon. They're trying to pin QAnon down as a bunch of terrorists when it's like, what terrorists are waving the American flag? You know. Anyways, it's just ridiculous. Where were we? Let's see. Should we watch more of this video? I don't know. This video, these people have no idea of what QAnon is or what it's doing, or they just think it's like they think it's about Trump, and it's so much bigger than that. I don't know. Should we just get into the book now? What do you think, Scott? Should we get into the book? Yeah. All right. So I guess let's just talk about the book. Let's not even read it yet. Let's just talk about what the hell this is, because if QAnon is gone, then why do they have very expensive looking magazines being made? How much did this cost you, Scott? This looks expensive. A lot of cool pictures. Very patriotic book, right? A lot of very cool pictures. So this book was written by Juan O'Savin. We got to talk about Juan O'Savin because he is the mysterious. I wouldn't say he's the leader of Q. Would you say he's the leader of Q? He kind of just seems to be the reigning champion of disseminating Q info. He was able to dance around the information landmines that were going on towards the election. You had a lot of these Q believers that were I guess, what would you call them? They're just the Q heads, the Q talking heads, like all the biggest talking heads that were disseminating the Q information. You had them putting out a lot of what ended up being bad information, and a lot of people got embarrassed. I remember reading on a website about Q an article, and it was in December, I think early December. And in the comments down below the article, people were arguing about, is Q real? Like, oh, you guys are a bunch of crazy. Like somebody had wrote on there, if Biden is inaugurated on January 20th, he's like, I will lock myself into a mental institution. So, I mean, people really believe this stuff and then end up not being true when it's like, to me, the signs were obvious that it was going to happen. But now, I mean, we can obviously see with the audits and everything that's going on that there for sure 100% was some funny business going on the days of the election. There for sure 100% was people who have already been charged and are serving their time to whatever it is for election fraud, voting twice, or actually being ticket counters and doing something illegal, part of the process. So, I mean, just to say that this is a secure election is just absolutely ridiculous. And then probably YouTube, I mean, I guess it doesn't matter. YouTube's probably going to flag this episode because I'm saying all this, but whatever. We have 11 subscribers, so fuck it. Once we actually are monetized, we'll probably have a website or something where we have to talk about all this stuff. But anyway, so Juan O'Savin. The movement needs the public to wake up. Yeah. What is going to be that thing, though? What's going to wake the public up? Everyone has a different opinion because everyone has a different theory about what's going on. In a weird way, this is how I see it. They're going to basically make the Democrats, the people who are on the extreme ends, both the right extreme and the left extreme, they're kind of out there, right? They're not really they have their own way of thinking, and it's not the way like I think most of us kind of like are in this bubble in the middle, and then you have the people that are the most extreme. They're the ones that are kind of pulling all the the tension towards their way, and they kind of get their way. Anyways, I kind of forgot where I was going with that. Whatever. Let's so 107, he's kind of like the patron saint of QAnon. And why is that? There is a lot of he's giving out good information, one, and there seems to be a strange link between 107 and John F. Kennedy Jr. So some people believe that 107 is actually John F. Kennedy Jr., who is now there's the reasons they think this. He's close to a similar size, I guess, height. He's a similar age. The things going against it is that his voice, if it's the same, has severely aged. His voice, to me, is the giveaway that he is not JFK Jr., other than the fact that he does not admit it or even really entertain it that much, other than a few, I guess, like references that he makes in some of his interviews. And I guess during certain times of his interviews, he sounds a little bit like him. I've listened to as many recordings of JFK Jr. as on the internet, and I don't see it. I don't see it personally, but a lot of people do. Is it possible that JFK Jr. is even still alive? I think it's very possible. I think that faking your death is pseudocide, or they call it, is a very common thing among rich people. I think that he would have had a reason to do it. It makes a lot of sense that he would have faked his death. With Hillary being tied into the cabal and how much power the Clintons had back then, them trying to run for the same state, Hillary and the cabal, the kind of people that would have done anything to get them out of their way. Let's see. And then why is the tie to John F. Kennedy Jr. necessary and so strong? Did the QAnon folks completely make up the narrative that JFK Jr. is actually behind all of this, or is there something to it? I don't know. I think it's pretty bold. It's pretty bold and pretty genius to think of the entire story, for one, on your own, and then two, create that entire story and perpetuate it would be extremely difficult if it was only a story. If this is just an idea coming out of someone's head, it would be extremely difficult, I think. Now, but what's the truth? We don't know. Is 107 JFK Jr.? We don't know. Scott and I have talked about this a lot. We kind of come to the conclusion that it doesn't necessarily matter. But my biggest thing is, if it's not true, does it matter? To me, it doesn't matter. I mean, if it is true, it does matter. If it is true, even that JFK Jr. is still alive, it matters big time. Because now we're talking about, I mean, gosh, that would be like the cherry on the top of the cake as far as conspiracies go. They have a man whose father was killed in our, not our lifetime, not my lifetime, but in our time, I guess, in my dad's lifetime, who obviously, I mean, when you go back and we're gonna read into this book, and it's basically going to start back from the Lincoln times and document the attempted corruption from the globalist elite is really kind of what it does, and which is what I want to look at, because regardless of what's ultimately in this book has tons of fuel for research and different things to show evidence of the cabal and what they've been trying to do. And really, I think that, America was created to take the cabal out. And I think that the cabal has been trying to do whatever they can in the meantime to take America out. And they've slowly corroded and slimed their way into certain parts where they have a lot of control and a lot of power in this country. But there's something to this QAnon movement. I think that it's extremely important, and we don't totally know why yet, but it's still around, it's still there, and I think it's going to come back up again. Yeah, so I mean, if JFK Jr. is still alive, it would be huge news. If he's not still alive, would this be so potent? I don't know, which makes me think it would be a good reason to keep your identity secret if you were not JFK, and allow people to think that you were. But that is a weird way to do it. It's a weird way to perpetuate it, if that's true. Let's see. Chapter 1. So this book is called The Kid by the Side of the Road, and obviously it's talking about the old footage of actually, let's see if I could find that footage. The old footage of JFK Jr. Let's see. Oh, I don't have that. Let's see. JFK Jr. saluting. The old picture of JFK Jr. saluting. Oh, okay. We'll have to do it another time. Anyways, so this starts off talking about Lincoln. So I'll just kind of read this. So it says, as a country, one thing people forget in this modern era is that we've been in a national crisis numerous times, far more than people care to recall. We do remember 9/11, and some of us were around during President Kennedy's assassination. Then there was Abraham Lincoln's assassination 150 years ago. But there's a common theme that's been going on through all of these crises that I think we need to revisit today. And that is about who is actually behind the scene orchestrating these events that we are continually put into. Is it always unique players in new situations? Or is there an underlying theme and a common group of perpetrators with these crimes against America and the world? Is there an organization of people trying to keep us enslaved? Heck yeah. Now, if you go back to the origins of our country, there were people who came to this continent to set up colonies, growing the population until it was eventually large enough that local jurisdictions were needed to manage and maintain the organization of streets, taxes, tariffs, property ownership, etc. Then came the creation of the constitutional government from groups of states aligned and working together. But immediately upon signing the Declaration of Independence, that federal system was established, called the United States of America, essentially needed to declare war against its motherland of England and the ruler, King George. We decided we were no longer going to be ruled from afar by foreign masters. We were not going to be their slaves here, helping to keep them prosperous there. So we declared our independence and had a revolutionary war that went on for a very long time. Much longer than people realize. Though the course of many battles, people were forced to pick a side. The willingness to go against England and King George was not universal from the outset. On numerous occasions, strategies and tactics were compromised by infiltrators and turncoats on both sides. But over time, people's true nature and alliances were revealed, just as is playing out once again before us today. Even some of those closest to President Washington became traitors against him and our newly formed country for the gains they would earn from their British partners. And even after we won the Revolutionary War, when the Brits had retreated, we then needed to win a second war against England. The War of 1812 was foisted upon us by people trying to gain control of America again through our money and banking systems. That was a very extensive battle and bad situation that we had to again fight our way out of. By most accounts, it was a bankers' war to gain control of our banking and monetary systems. They wanted to control our currency, even though the Constitution would only allow for our own government to create our money. As we move forward in time, what happened during Abraham Lincoln's presidency, early on in his administration, and instigated by monarchy agents out of Europe, a rift was accentuated between the northern and southern U.S. With that, another variation of the same old bankers' war was created. In order to get money to fight that war, Lincoln needed loans from European banks that held monarchy money. The bloodline families' money, those 13 bloodlines, were represented in the colonies that had to pursue funds to fight the war against the South. But the bankers wanted 24% to 36% interest. So Lincoln declined that extortion and used his presidential powers to issue interest-free money, having no indebtedness to foreign bankers. This currency was based on the good faith and credit of the American people and their government, and it was not backed with silver or gold, but worked for all debts, whether with public government entities or private individuals and their businesses. With green printing on the back, that money Lincoln issued became known as greenbacks, which is where we get the same term used today. One of the interesting things about those greenbacks is that they were hated by the foreign banks. In fact, I want to give you part of an article from the London Times that came out after President Lincoln issued that American-owned currency. Hold on, get a drink. If that mischievous financial policy, which had its origins in North American Republic, should become established, down to a fixture, then that government will furnish its own money without cost. It will pay off debts and be without debt. It will have all the money necessary to carry on its commerce. It will become prosperous beyond precedent in the history of the civilized governments of the world. The brains and the wealth of all the countries will go to North America. That government must be destroyed, or it will destroy every monarchy on the globe. The bankers obviously got it. Those 13 royal bloodlines families, of which the Rothschilds at the head of the table there was in the city of London, understood that only real threats to their power are sovereign governments like ours that are able to print their interest-free and debt-free paper money. Those bankers knew it would break their power over the people and in the U.S. and then spread it to the rest of the world. Think about what Lincoln did there, after which he also fought the Civil War and won. A decade after that war ended, greenbacks had become worth as much as gold and had even been moving higher. So today, people are wondering how well we're doing as a country. As I give this presentation on Patriot Productions' social media channel on April 15th of 2020, not many had noticed what happened with the financial institutions during this recent COVID-19 event. President Trump moved the private banking cartel's Federal Reserve back under the U.S. Treasury Authority, where the Secretary of the Treasury, Steve Mnuchin, is answerable only to the President of the United States. Let's think about that. You remember those bankers in Lincoln's time when he started our own currency? They felt they had to come back at him. They needed to get him as payback in retaliation for daring to print our own currency and not pay them interest. And in the big picture, understand this. The only place in our planet where the Queen of England or whatever reigning monarch is on the throne in England has to annually present him or herself in front of and bow curtsy to is the mayor of the city of London. Why? It's because the power behind the throne, which is the real money behind all the royal bloodline families, is these people that consider themselves to be descendants of the biblical Cain, who was the firstborn of mankind. and its first murderer. They are these kings who presume to rule by what they feel is in their blood right. These people who get their power by working as a team to control all governments of the world by domination of the planet's money. And it's all done out of the city of London. Annually, the Queen of England has to present herself to the mayor of the city of London and does so with her shoes off. She curtsies and defers to that mayor's authority, which comes from the bankers. And it's because that mayor runs a city-state, the city of London, which is not part of England, but it's on its own sovereign territory, just as there are city-states of the Vatican and Washington, D.C. So, pretty interesting so far. Basically, giving us a crash course into, I guess not even a crash course, just a glimpse into how we were handling the money cartels. If you're ever interested, I think everybody needs to know what the World Bank is and who the Rothschilds are and what they do, because they basically get countries to go to war with each other and to break them and take out a bunch of loans and indebt them, and then after the war is over, whoever's the winning one, or even the losing one, is in so much debt that they have to take out these loans, and now they're indebted to the Rothschilds, who eventually just take over the whole country and make them strong arm them into whatever they want to do. So let's see. So moving on. During the Kennedy administration, President Kennedy had a similar situation. He also realized what was going on with these people. So he set out to create our own currency that would again be interest-free money. Remember this very telling admission from Mayer Amschel Rothschild. Here's a picture of him right here. Let's see. Hold on, I can't see. Let me see if you can see it. There he is, right down there. He looks like a douche. Okay. So he said, "Permit me to issue and control the money of a nation, and I care not who makes its laws." Yeah, because I'm a douche. All right. Then, so fast forward to President Kennedy. Right there, President Kennedy. When Kennedy came into office, he was fighting these monsters who were really destroying the United States. They created wars and pushed us into all kinds of other efforts we didn't want to take on. And that's because they have always manipulated us in their pursuit of making money from us, constantly keeping us in whatever battles they'd like, using our citizens and the American military against other lands. They instigate and push all wars all over the planet with the use of Americans and our military might, as if we're a bunch of as if we're a branch office of their secret service spy agencies around the world. And that's pretty much true. I mean, the CIA was made in accordance with MI6 and the British intelligence, and they're more loyal to each other than they are to their countries. Same with the KGB, but they're not really a thing anymore. So after the Bay of Pigs and various other events that President Kennedy either dealt with or witnessed, he came up with a solution. On June 4th of 1963, he signed Executive Order 11110, which is an interesting number because World War I ended on the 11th month on the 11th day and at the 11th hour of the day. That was precisely when those in control stopped the war. Why? It's because of the numerology. 111111 is symbolic for them. President Kennedy, being knowledgeable about their codes and numbers, sent them a coded message with 11s. It said, "We're going to stop your wars." It was Kennedy's answer to World War I and World War II, and as a message for those trying to get us into World War III. And running our country's finances, that executive order gave President Kennedy the legal authority to create money that was interest and debt-free, currency belonging only to the American people. It was just what Lincoln had done with his greenbacks. Kennedy had these notes printed, blatantly ignoring the Federal Reserve notes from the private banks. Even today, many Americans don't understand that the Federal Reserve and the Internal Revenue Service are no more federal than the Federal Express. They are administered by federal employees, but the U.S. courts have shown the IRS is a Puerto Rican corporation, and of course there is nothing in the Federal Registry identifying an income tax, which is because it's voluntary. Each year, we Americans voluntarily assess for ourselves a certain amount we supposedly owe. Of course, at the end of the day, it's enforced using the statutes regarding liquor, tobacco, and firearms, just as though it is a mandatory tax. And the courts, as well as the rest of our legal system, have gone along with it. In fact, months before 9/11 happened in 2001, Congress had scheduled hearings for October of 2001 to look into the legality of the IRS and the way the laws surrounding it have been enforced. But those hearings never happened because of 9/11. Great job, sounding like a D-bag. Yeah, that's how he looks like he sounds like. So repeatedly over time, we've had incidents occur that change the course of the country, and April seems to be an appealing month for their events. They kind of enjoy making these things happen in April. Why is that? Well, most of us probably don't realize that Gregorian, Julian, and other calendars have been put forth over time for us to use, are not the same as same calendar used by those people who are engaged. We are engaged against. These royal and banking families actually go by the Babylonian calendar, and with that, they're making of time the beginning of the new millennium for this Babylonian group, a 1,000-year period of new world that they want to see created. Occurred in the spring of 2012. We're just ending the 7th year and beginning the 8th of the new millennium for these Babylonians. And 8 is their number of the new day. It's the number of Horus, or the rising sun, having to do with the pagan festival of Ishtar, or Easter. To them, 2020 is just the beginning of year 8, the new day, and they wanted to get it off to a good start. I would contend that this COVID-19 crisis we've just been subject to here in the spring of 2020 were sort of a blood sacrifice to their gods, and they intended for the beginning of their new millennium, having it be bathed in blood. I wish he would give a little bit more backstory into some of these, because they do pray to like Baal and some like Babylonian gods, Molech, the giant stone owl. So, and I know that they seem to be very ritual based. They're very occultic and very into the ritual base. Yeah. So let's keep going. Now, when we look back into the history at events that have occurred during this time of the year, there's another that stands out. It was kind of the 9/11 of its era. People we know behind the scenes understand exactly what the significant truly was. Real quick though, while we're talking about sacrifices, I think that the Vegas shooting was some type of sacrifice. I saw some weird things about how it was like in front of the Luxor, and it had a bunch of things to do with like Egyptian type sacrifice and all this stuff. Kind of there were some things with the dates too. I remember a lot of weird stuff with that one. Anyways, it was kind of like the 9/11 of its era. People in the know behind the scenes understood exactly what the significance truly was, but they weren't heard. That monumental event was the sinking of the Titanic on April 14th, 1912. In the calm waters of the ice-cold North Atlantic, 100 years before the end of another Babylonian millennium, the Titanic sailed at a maximum speed across that ocean on a pitch-black, star-filled, and moonless night. Into a known field of icebergs. There had been numerous radio reports concerning the location of those many drifting masses of glacial ice. At the time, the radio communications were done ship to ship and port to port by telegraph. Unreleased and unknown to the public in those days was the capability to triangulate a ship's relative position using regular radio signal strength from their positions nearby. Other ships, which were stopped for the night, including by some reports, a rudimentary early submarine which had been tracking locations of icebergs in the area. Some contended that the iceberg's field location information was being conveyed to the captain of the Titanic. He was responsible for precisely aiming the Titanic at the center of the field of icebergs during those very dark and midnight hours. Let's see, what is this? This is Jekyll Island Clubhouse. It's showing over here. I don't know if we're going there next. Hold on, I just want to look up what is the Jekyll Island Clubhouse real quick. Let's look. Jekyll Island Clubhouse. What is it? Jekyll Island Lodging. Oh, I guess that's maybe it was a country club for all these rich and powerful people, because it's still standing. I'll show you guys. Look at Jekyll Island Club. Look at it. It looks almost exactly the same. Look there. Looks like they put an addition onto it, though. Okay, so what they're talking about here is basically we had. Oh, well, I'll just read it because he's going to tell the story better than I can. So the captain, he's been told to drive in the center of these icebergs. Did he maybe have a deal lined up to somehow get off the boat after? Was that promise not honored? We don't know. Let's see. Oh, what did Scott say? A meeting with Trump and the Saudi prince took place at that same time in a nearby hotel in Vegas. Yeah, I've heard that it was like possibly an arms deal gone bad. We didn't hold up to the end of our bargain, and so they were like, if you don't, we're gonna open fire on these people, and so they didn't. And yeah, I've heard a lot of stuff about that. He said, or the Saudi prince and some of the big tech owners from Twitter's and attempted on the Saudi prince's life for arresting the previous ruler. Yeah. And just how quickly they brushed that under the rug. I mean, come on. They just blamed it on one crazy guy. Doesn't make any sense. And then that crazy guy used to be an employee of Lockheed or something. He was used to be a government contractor, probably doing some gangster shit over in the Middle East. So the book right now, is it possible that the captain was under, so I did some research on this on my own, and it's going to talk about how these very rich magnates, were on that ship, and they all three died. And that there is let's just get there. I don't want to get too ahead of myself. Okay. So what was going on with this whole setup? Why were all these pictures put into motion? It was because the Titanic was never intended to make it make the crossing intact. It had to go down. For their Babylonian ritual, it was to be a death ship from the day it was put on the drawing boards, actually designing it that way for a purpose. But who would plan such a dastardly event? How could anything so monstrous and monumental actually be prepared and accomplished? What would be the point? At that time, in 1911, America just experienced a huge financial crisis that involved government offices having to close because they could not pay their bills. The U.S. was stretched thin from a war in the Philippines and other things, so they weren't getting the job done. And 2 years earlier, in April of 1910, 7 of the richest men in the world, cumulatively the single wealthiest group of people in the world at the time, had gotten together to map out a place called a plot at a place called Jekyll Island, one of the Golden Isle Barrier Islands off the coast of Georgia. Georgia, that's where the Guidestones are. What's the significance there? Let's see. In order to reach their goal of creating a new private central bank that would again siphon money from the American labor, they analyzed who and what was in opposition and how they had to go about eliminating those challenges that were standing in the way of these 7 wealthy men controlling our money creation. They would do whatever was needed to get out into a position to earn future interests from the U.S., just as rich men had tried to set up for our country in the past, before those other central banks were kicked out for being an unneeded service. The end result of that Jekyll Island meeting was that this planned event on the North Atlantic Ocean, their name on the island was just an interim planning session to make sure that they had all the jots and tittles in the right place, leading to their planned vote in 1913 U.S. Congress, where they took control of our money when few were paying attention on Christmas Eve of that year. So what they're saying is that basically they planned on sinking the ship with these very rich magnates on there that they believed would oppose them in the Federal Reserve. And then I don't even think a full year later, they I guess a little bit, maybe over a year. They, on Christmas Eve, when no one's paying attention, they pass the approval for the Federal Reserve, which pretty much controls our entire money supply. And that's who we're $28 trillion in debt to. Of course, the number of yes votes needed for the majority at a special holiday session like that, with the right payoffs, guaranteed their desired result. The winter solstice, which now celebrate the Christmas seasons in Roman times, was celebrated with an event called the Saturnalia Festival. I wrote extensively about that in a previous article. This detail is relevant here because Saturn's temple in Rome was the place where Roman coinage was minted. For these wizards, there is a symbology in capturing the authority to manufacture and control the mining of money in America and the precise time of the Roman Saturnalia festival. See the king of Misrule and his princess. What a Christmas present we received when they created the Federal Reserve Board, a private entity that is no more federal than Federal Express. And this mostly foreign and English banking cartel run primarily by the Jesuits, not Jews, would thereafter print and manage America's money supply while charging us interest for handling our money, which is just colored paper without having any gold backing or even real money management assistance. It's their vig or their take by this bunch of bloodline family mobsters who are European thugs, mostly out of the city of London. The Titanic was part of the White Star Line, which, by the way, is code for the Sirius, or the Dog Star, which is the brightest star in the night sky. That shipping line was owned by Morgan, and I've looked this up. This is actually true. He actually had a roundabout way of owning it. The Titanic was set up as the most magnificent and unsinkable ship ever to float on the oceans. Morgan was scheduled to get on the ship, making the crossing from England to the U.S. with the other elites who would be on this boat, the richest American businessmen of that time. The plan was that they could talk during this voyage and try to come up with a solution that would eliminate these engineered banking crises that mysteriously keep happening to us. At the time, during our country's most previous financial crisis, and J.P. Morgan was head of the Morgan Banking Interest, which was the largest bank in America, he had personally guaranteed money to keep our government going while we worked out a solution. Even up to today, America just keeps getting buried in debt to these foreign bankers. So all that's true. Morgan was supposed to be there. It's his ship. And he calls in sick basically the day before and says that he's not going to make it. So John Jacob Astor was one of the richest people in America at that time, and one of the richest people in the world. Was on board, and arguably the richest. He says arguably the richest single man on the planet at the time. Astor was an American who opposed that type of national bank. So here's the part: I could not find anything that actually proved that they would oppose it. I mean, being conservatives, they would probably oppose it, and being that they would be the ones getting screwed in this, whereas J.P. Morgan probably single-handedly gets to make out like a thief, because he just basically gets to sit on a cloud of money given to him by the European bloodlines. So Astor was an American who opposed that type of national bank that eventually became the Federal Reserve. Other wealthy American businessmen on the ship were Isidor Straus and Benjamin Guggenheim. Cumulatively, those three represented the largest single block of wealth in our country, and each man was solidly opposed to European orchestrated central bank. Again, I could not find any information that solidly showed them opposing it. But I didn't research very long, but other people said they haven't been able to find that either. But it makes sense that they would be opposed to something like that. And each man was, blah, blah, blah. They were all going to be on board the Titanic with J.P. Morgan to talk these things over and try leaving the ship with an acceptable solution that could be pushed politically and brought to pass, eliminating our monetary and government payment, servicing the debt crisis. Government employees having to stay home with no paycheck was not acceptable. So as these wealthy Americans and all their other passengers got into the enormous ship in London, J.P. Morgan's bags, his servants, and everything he would need for the trip had been brought to the boat, with much of it was visibly loaded. Inexplicably, his most valuable possessions, including rare paintings, were held in the back at the last moment. Reportedly, Morgan was ready to board, and everyone was anxiously awaiting his arrival. Being a bit of a diva, Morgan was expected to arrive at the last minute because he was such an important person. Suddenly, with very short notice and few on the boat even realizing what had happened, J.P. Morgan had other things come up. Actually, he said he was sick. That's what he said, and could not depart with the other prominent men for these crucial meetings. Morgan stayed behind. After the boat had left the dock, those in the first class section were shocked to find out that he wasn't even on the boat. But still, the huge vessel continued its voyage anyways, and they had no clue about their situation being a death ship. And the crew steamed ahead with the reality that these famous, celebrated men had been baited onto the boat. The ship was always intended to attract them into this gilded cage that would be taken to the North Atlantic and sunk, in a ritual that was designed to secure these foreign bankers' positions over the control of America. The Titanic was sailing at full speed when it crashed into the iceberg. One interesting feature of that ship had a very small rudder, making it impossible to turn as quickly as it would have been intended. All it needed was heading information that steered the boat right into the iceberg. And according to many, of that ice hadn't taken out, the submarine was available in the area to give the Titanic a coup de grace, which turned out to be unnecessary. Here's an unknown aspect of that ship sitting on the bottom of the ocean right now. It's not the Titanic. That is not even the ship that you think. Instead, it's the Titanic's sister ship, her twin, the Olympic. Fantastic research has been done by multiple people who have meticulously documented this, including photos showing the Titanic that was swapped with the Olympic while they were parked. One why would they do that? Well, the Olympic was the first of the 2 ships being built, making it more advanced in its construction timetable. And during the testing phase, the Olympic hit a British military ship coming out through a clearing as it left the harbor. That collision put a gash in the length of a football field on the starboard side of the Olympic's forward bow. This Titanic sister was taken to a shipyard, repaired, but then the work done wasn't using the highest quality steel. In fact, they used cheap pig iron that was much more fragile and, of course, buckles easily relative to the steel that should have been used to. So the pig iron on this huge gash right at the waterline made it a fragile ship. There are photographs of the ship swapping as it occurred. Not only was the Olympic substituted for a real Titanic, but of course their badging had to be exchanged as well. That seems like an irrelevant point to me. I mean, it doesn't matter what the ship's name was. Okay, and then here's something that they didn't mention. So 2 things that I researched is that they talk about that there was a large fire in the hull so it was a coal powered steel. It was a steam powered engine. They burnt coal to boil the water, create the steam, and basically a fire they had set some coal on fire, like a big pile of coal where they would shovel the coal into the furnace. And once the coal got ignited, they couldn't really put it out. And the way that it was explaining it is that instead of putting it out, they just basically just kept throwing the coal that was already on fire and throwing it into the furnace. But they trying to just keep up with it, which is saying why that they were going so fast, because they basically couldn't slow down because they were trying to get rid of this coal. I guess there's like, let's try to look at some photo evidence of a dark spot. Titanic dark spot. Let's look at this real quick. All right. Okay, so supposedly there's like a dark spot in the hole right here. And some people were theorizing that that basically that's where the fire was happening, and it had already weakened the metal. This is the rudder. Kind of a small rudder for how big the ship was. Scott says it's only relevant that due to the ship being more susceptible to taking on damage quickly, guaranteeing to go down. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. But I mean, that could have been the Titanic. I mean, it doesn't matter what the ship's name is. I guess if they're just to make the point that they could have swapped the ship. And I guess if they're alluding to, it's a fact that the Olympic had hit another ship, I guess the proving it would be in finding the evidence that they switched it, which is probably hard to find since it's not more common knowledge. But maybe it's a combination of things. And then there was another video that I watched recollecting a survivor, one of the few men that survived, because it was all women and children that got to board the boats. They were having an issue not filling them full enough, so a ton of people had to stay behind and died. But one of the men that survived said that they didn't even see an iceberg. I think that this is where the conspiracy started to brew, is that you had people there that never saw an iceberg and that actually heard a giant explosion. So is it possible that they placed some kind of bomb on the ship that made it blow up? Is it possible that the fire finally got out of control and blew up? I don't know. This dark spot, though, let's see. Yeah, kind of interesting. Let's go back. Let's see if we can get a better picture of it. I mean, it's kind of hard to see. I mean, there's another dark spot right here too. I mean, I guess that one's obviously darker. Where else? Now, are these pictures mirrored? Because in this one, I don't see a dark spot in that one. It's too dark. This must be a drawing. That looks like a drawing. That is a digital recreation. That's not what it looked like, obviously. So it was in the front. Yeah, I guess so. They're saying that it's possible that a fire was in the front, and that's where it hit the berg. I don't see any other good ones here of the dark spot. Here's what it looks like underwater. I heard that. Oh, looks like a different ship. Titanic's. Oh, maybe not. I heard that it's like very, very deteriorated. That it's not going to last another 25 years. It's going to be completely just a giant chunk of rust down there. They won't even be able to go inside it anymore. It will have probably collapsed completely on itself. Okay. So let's go back. Let's finish this little bit about the Titanic, and I think that's where we're going to end for today. It says, we as Americans consider... So from that point on, you have a much more fragile Titanic, already crippled before it even left the dock. And even more if it's got a fire going on in there. And there was another thing that I read that basically they had it inspected the day of it leaving, and the inspection only took a couple of hours, whereas normally these inspections last days. And it's possible that someone was paid off to like kind of get a rush job done. And it's like, they were probably hanging their key on the fact that, hey, this is the safest ship that ever sailed. So, I mean, why bother? We're in a hurry. Here's some money. Like, just go away. Because that's how things kind of probably worked even more back then. The ship was set out across the ocean with all of those business people and other blood sacrifices to move into the takedown position at the altar again. This was a plot and plan by those wizards to gain control over America. Though it was a huge tragedy of lives lost, the incident looked relatively inconsequential to the financial affairs of the world on that day, because few understand the leverage of those deaths that had around the fate of America. Even up to right now, over 100 years later. When we as Americans consider the Federal Reserve, our monetary system that we don't own, which was created on December 24th of 1913 and came into power of that next year, what was it that happened to America? Were we warned about foreign central banks like what we have now running the Federal Reserve System? A private banking organization that took over the creation, manufacture, and pricing of our money. Repeatedly, we were warned that these bankers would do what they have always done: print money like madmen, lower interest rates, get a whole bunch of loans out there, and then suddenly reverse course to spring their trap, stopping the flow of money and raising interest rates to the moon, and that way grabbing their ill-gotten gains from the bottom and bust cycles that snatch away people's life savings. After the creation of their predatory bank and the foreign bankers foreign bankers employed those cycles almost immediately. What happened to the crash of 1929? It started in Europe when the bankers withdrew credit. setting off a daisy chain of financial busts that reached America in the fall of 1929. With our stock market crash and the collapse of business, what gain did these bankers collect? What action did these bloodlines of families take? They bought the dazed people's farms and businesses for pennies, even fractions of a penny on the dollar. It's hard to imagine. In the course of all this, so basically they were forcing farmers to sell their farms. That's an interesting one because I remember, I don't know, I was like a cartoon that I saw when I was a kid, or maybe it was like in that show Animal Farm they made us watch in school about communism. But basically how they're basically breaking everybody and then coming in with these lowball offers and pushing people off their land because they had no other option. In the course of all this, we've had to go through boom, bust, depression, and war cycles. Every time they get us to a useful enough depression where all the young guys aren't able to find work and there's nothing for them to do, up pops a war so our children can join the army to pay the bills. Yep, that's fucking why I did it. Go Navy. Up pops a war so our children can join the army to pay the bills. Send money home to mom and be able to marry their girl. But many won't do these things despite joining. That's because they don't come home in one piece or even alive, thus thinning out our population. To deprive us of our best, brightest, and strongest, which allows the globalists to control us a bit more by fear. Yep, I've always suspected that's what wars are really for, to kill certain groups of people. John Kennedy understood all this, and as the bankers tried to start another war with him as sitting president, he presided over the Bay of Pigs incident with Cuba. They were stirring up trouble every time he turned around. JFK knew these sorts of global threats were being dealt out by the secret societies infiltrating America as opposed to any potential doomed overt invasion against the strongest military on earth. Most everyone around him was compromised, leaving Kennedy not knowing which of his aides, officials, and even cabinet holders were good or bad. There were also issues with the Dulles brothers, the CIA, the State Department, most everywhere else in the government. Who are the Dulles brothers? Hold on, I'm going to look that up real quick. Who's the Dulles brothers? The Dulles brothers. Alan Dulles. Uh-oh. He looks like a scumbag. What does it say? Alan Welsh Dulles was the first civilian director of the Central Intelligence. Oh, yeah. For sure he's a douchebag. Nobody trusts the CIA. The CIA doesn't even trust the CIA. Is the first director of the Central Intelligence Agency. I thought it was that other guy, that lawyer guy. That's weird. During the early Cold War, he oversaw the 1953 Iranian coup d'etat, the 1954 Guatemalan coup d'etat. Look at that, us undermining all these countries. The Lockheed U-2 aircraft and Project MK Ultra. Douchebag. He's the douche of douchebags. I don't know. He's probably like number 3 douchebag at the time. Number 3 douchebag in America at the time. Dulles was one of the members of the Warren Commission. A bunch of douchebags investigating the assassination of JFK. Between his stints with the government, everyone in the Warren Commission should go to in jail. Dulles was a corporate lawyer and a partner of the Sullivan and Cromwell. His older brother, John Foster Dulles, another douchebag. He's an American diplomat and lawyer, Republican politician. He served United States Secretary of State under President Dwight D. Eisenhower. Oh, I think he was in the MJ-12. MJ-12 he's part of. Let's look at who was the original MJ-12. The Majestic 12. Going back into aliens real quick. Going back into UFOs. Got to dip back into it. He certainly is a D-bag. Major D-bag. Top 3 D-bag. You are top 3. You are top 3 D-bag. Alleged members. Lloyd Berkner, Ditev Bronk, Vannevar Bush, James Forrestal. Suspicious suicide. We're going to talk about him one day. Gordon Gray, Helen Cotter. No, Dulles is not on there. It's kind of weird being the Secretary of State. You think he would have something to do with it. Let's just look at Dulles on UFOs. Oh yeah. Well, of course. Yeah, of course he's into it. If he's the director of the CIA, he was in the know. He had to have been. Cuz they were one of the, pretty much the CIA, the Air Force, the Army, the Navy, and I think that's it. Not so much the FBI, but pretty much those 4 groups. Yeah, pretty much those 4 groups were all collecting data on UFOs and aliens, and nobody wanted to share it with each other because they were all pining for the same, basically, grants or government money, and whoever came up with the best stuff, whoever could find the best stuff would get the most money. So they didn't want anybody to have it. Also, because it was the Cold War, they were afraid of Russian spies getting this information. So it was like compartmentalized hardcore within each branch. So not even only like certain people, very specific people. Like it was a small handful of people that really knew about this information. Anyways, that's who Dulles is. A D-bag. Look at that. Alan Dulles was able to use information from Heinrich Mayer's resistance group and very important Operation Crossbow. Crossbow was the code name for World War II and the Anglo-American operations. Anglo-American? That's like British-American operations against the German long-range reprisal weapons. Operation Crossbow was a preliminary mission for Operation Overlord. Kennedy, you gave the national security member to Dulles? All right, let's keep reading about this D-bag. Okay, is this chapter almost done? This is a long chapter. Okay, I think we're gonna end it there. We're gonna continue next time. We're gonna find out more about what Kennedy had to do before he was assassinated. Oh, let's see. I think I didn't finish this. So there was also issues with the Dulles brothers, the CIA, State Department, and most everywhere else in the government. He couldn't win for losing. And when Kennedy was killed, what happened to the real money? Not phony Federal Reserve banknote currency he had created with the Executive Order 11110. That day after he was assassinated in Dallas, the no-interest U.S. currency that Kennedy had created was all revoked and bought back up. As paycheck to those behind the assassination, one of the very first acts of Lyndon Johnson was to revoke that non-central bank money. Okay, so we're going to end there, and then we're going to go back into it probably next week or the week after. We have episode 4 of the podcast coming up soon. We're going to go into deep. We're going to go deep into the underground, deep bases, the DUMBs, deep underground military bases, DUMBs. The Dulce base in particular, we're going to hear from Phil Schneider, the 1995 whistleblower that got himself killed trying to get this information out. So very important person, one of my favorite people to talk about because his story is so interesting and he's not an uncredible person. So we're going to talk about that, I think, on either Wednesday or Thursday. Episode 4 is coming out. So I guess just to recap this, we talked about UFO in the news. We brought up the fact that the mainstream media, except for MSNBC, thinks that QAnon is gone and dead. We read this book that was written early last year about this, or a little bit before this time last year. Kind of gives us some insight into why Q thinks the way that they do, because and I think that's important because I believe that Q is being majorly misrepresented, and we haven't seen its full importance just yet. So thanks everybody for joining in on my podcast or watching it after the fact if you're watching this pre-recorded, and